Good morning, everyone. Can I ask you to please take your seats? The sitting is open. I have one announcement before we start. In relation to the decision by several committees to enter interinstitutional negotiations pursuant to Rule 72, paragraph 1, announced at the opening of the session on Monday, 27th April, I have received no request for a vote in Parliament by members or political groups reaching at least the medium threshold. The committees may therefore start negotiations. The next item on the agenda is Council and Commission statements, EU strategy in response to the ongoing Middle East crisis, its implications on energy prices and the availability of fertilizers. We will start with the Council. Deputy Minister for European Affairs, representing the Cypriot Presidency, Marilena Rauna.
Madam President, honourable members, President of the European Commission, thank you for this very important debate, which comes in the immediate aftermath of the informal leaders' meeting in Cyprus last week, which focused on the EU's contribution to de-escalation, freedom of navigation and addressing the impact on energy prices. It is abundantly clear that the ongoing crisis in the Middle East carries profound global repercussions that directly impact the Union's security environment and interests. As noted in this hemicycle last month, this conflict is neither abstract nor distant. Quite the contrary. It is in our neighbourhood. It has wide-ranging consequences on our security and economies, and it requires us, as European Union, to actively engage and act in unity with a coherent and coordinated approach. Acting in unity also requires clarity of messaging and action, including on what to achieve in the long run. These include restoring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz in line with international law and UNCLOS, with no caveats or restrictions, working and contributing towards de-escalation that can pave the way for a lasting ceasefire and long-term peace and stability, and working to ensure that Iran does not acquire or develop the capacity to produce nuclear weapons. To achieve these objectives, our cooperation with our Middle East and Gulf partners is not merely important, it is a necessity. The Union has maintained regular and close contact at different levels with countries in the region. We have expressed solidarity with our regional partners who have been attacked and affected by this war. Partners who have shown to be reliable even in the midst of attacks on their territory. And we have reiterated our commitment to work with them for stability, while at the same time working to expand our dialogue and our strategic cooperation. In this regard, we have welcomed the ceasefire agreed by the United States and Iran on the 9th of April. We encourage parties to continue engaging in good faith. Diplomacy remains the only viable path towards restoring stability. The EU will continue to contribute to all diplomatic efforts in line with its consistent, reliable role, drawing on its diplomatic reach, experience and long-term partnerships. These core messages were clearly articulated both by the European Union and regional leaders last Friday in Nicosia in a productive meeting in the margins of the informal leaders meeting between the European Union and leaders from Lebanon, Egypt, Syria, Jordan and the Gulf. Honourable members, as mentioned, safeguarding freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz is a primary concern, given the massive impact on EU competitiveness, the energy market, and the impact on prices and cost of living. Disruption to energy and global trade flows and prices trigger ripple effects on fertilizer supply, on food prices, on economic growth, as well as on investment partners. In the context of safeguarding freedom of navigation, the role of EU Maritime Defensive Operation Aspides, that is providing a critical contribution to keeping one of the world's most vital waterways open and secure, is critical. In parallel, the Council is fully committed to working on new proposals that would help to mitigate the impact of the crisis on energy prices, directly reflecting the conclusions agreed during the European Council in March, the One Europe, One Market roadmap, which was co-signed in Cyprus in the margins of the Informal Leaders Summit by the three institutions. There is no silver bullet. As long as the EU continues to depend on imported fossil fuels, we will remain vulnerable to price spikes. It is clear that European strategic autonomy, European independence, goes hand in hand with energy security. That is why it is essential to stay the course on our energy transition goals in expanding domestically generated and affordable energy, together with short-term measures agreed to mitigate energy spikes. Our strategy is twofold. On the one hand, implementing immediate measures to stabilise energy prices, while simultaneously forging a robust energy union to secure our long-term strategic independence. The grids package is an essential part of this effort. Regarding fertilisers, we are looking forward to receiving the Commission's action plan, in the context of which we look to short-term measures to respond to the current circumstances, as well as measures to increase the resilience of the EU agricultural sector by reducing our reliance on imports. While we tackle the effects of the conflict in Iran, we cannot lose sight of the other sources of tension in the Middle East. Lebanon is paying a heavy price for a war it did not choose. Too many have lost their lives, and we have seen attacks on UN peacekeepers which are unacceptable. We welcome the ceasefire and ongoing preparatory talks under US auspices, and we urge all sides to end hostilities and fully respect Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We also cannot lose sight of the situation in Gaza and the West Bank. There needs to be progress on the implementation of the Gaza peace plan, in the absence of which there is a risk of undermining the fragile political momentum with all that this entails, including providing Hamas with the opportunity to consolidate control. The EU remains committed to do its part with all the tools at its disposal. In this framework, we convened last week two important international meetings in Brussels, that of the Global Alliance and that of the Ad Hoc Liaison Committee. Ultimately, just and sustainable peace can only be reached on the basis of a two-state solution, in line with the relevant UN Security Council resolutions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rauna. Now I give the floor to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen.
Thank you very much, Madam President, dear Roberta, Deputy Minister Rauna, dear Marilena, honourable members. The informal UCO started with good news for Europe and Ukraine. In spring, we have said that we would deliver on the 90 billion loan for Ukraine, one way or the other. Now we made good on this promise. We will disburse the first tranche of 45 billion euros for 2026, still this quarter. 1/3 for budgetary needs and 2/3 go to Ukraine's defence. And the first defence package will be on drones from Ukraine to Ukraine, worth some 6 billion euros. So our message is very clear. We will continue our support to the brave Ukrainian people and their armed forces. While Russia is doubling down on its aggression, Europe doubles down on our support for Ukraine. That day, we also adopted the 20th sanction package. And yes, the sanctions are biting. They have a biting effect on the Russian economy, with inflation increasing and interest rates skyrocketing. The consequences of Russia's war of choice are also being paid for out of Russian people's pockets, so much so that the Kremlin responds in an unusual way by restricting the internet and free communication. So much so that Russians feel that they live behind an iron curtain again, this time a digital iron curtain. But, honourable members, if history has one lesson, it's that all walls eventually fall. Honourable members, it's been exactly 2 months since the new war in the Middle East began, and we are finally witnessing a lull after weeks of violence. We all want the ceasefire in Iran and Lebanon to hold, with the ultimate goal to re-establish peace and stability through diplomatic means. We were joined in Cyprus by leaders from Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and the Secretary General of the GCC. And this was an opportunity to reiterate our solidarity with partners. Our shared goal is now to see a lasting end to the war. And this includes restoring full and permanent freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz without tolls. And it is equally clear that any peace agreement will have to address Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program. But there is also a harsh reality we all need to face. The consequences of this conflict may echo for months or even years to come. And this is why energy was on the top of the informal UKOS agenda. This is the second energy crisis within 4 years. And the lesson should be very clear. Our overdependency on imported fossil fuels makes us vulnerable. And let me give you 2 figures. In just 60 days of conflict, our bill for fossil fuel imports has increased by over 27 billion euros, without one single molecule of energy in addition. So the way forward is obvious. We must reduce our overdependency on imported fossil fuels, and we must boost our homegrown, affordable, clean energy supply from renewables to nuclear in full respect of technology neutrality. Already today, member states with more low-carbon sources in their energy mix are less impacted by the crisis. Take a country like Sweden. If there the gas price increases by €1 per megawatt hour, the electricity bill only increases by 0.04 euros per megawatt hour, because almost all of Sweden's electricity comes from renewables and nuclear. So this is how we insulate ourselves from future shocks, and this is the path to independence of Europe. Honourable members, as I said, every member state has a different energy mix. Therefore, a blanket solution, one size fits all, to address the current crisis would simply not work. And this is why last week we presented a whole toolbox of measures that can be combined differently in different parts of the Union. And I want to focus on 3 sets of measures. The first is increased coordination at the European level. At the start of the previous energy crisis, there was a rush to the gas markets, and this contributed to driving prices up. We basically were competing against ourselves at the global market. That's why at that time we stepped up European coordination, for instance with common gas procurement. This time we're taking the same approach one step further. We propose stronger coordination not only in filling national gas storage, but also when it comes to fuel reserves, especially jet fuels and diesel, where markets are tightening. We can be so much more effective if we coordinate the release of oil stocks and if we make sure that refineries can step up production all across our union. Because together we have the market power and we have the industrial might, so let's put it at the service of all Europeans. Second point, we have to protect consumers and businesses. And there is a lesson to be learned from the last crisis. Measures should be targeted to the most vulnerable households and industries only, and we should avoid increasing the demand for oil and gas at this time. Let me give you again a figure. During the last crisis, only 1/4 of the emergency support was targeted to vulnerable households and businesses. In other words, more than 350 billion euros were spent on untargeted measures. And this had a huge impact on member states' finances, and it also undermined the measures to protect those most in need. So let's not make the same mistake again, and let's focus our support where it matters most. And my third point is we must reduce energy demand by modernizing systemic energy use. In the short term, we can do this through a combination of energy efficiency and electrification. But we should also keep in mind that overall we will need energy in abundance, especially because of a rapid scale-up of data centers and artificial intelligence. Since the last crisis, we have already made great progress. In 2022, gas determined our electricity prices for 70% of the time. Today, this is down to 30%. And that is why this time we have avoided the huge price spikes of the previous crisis. But electricity still represents less than 1/4 of our final energy consumption. And this is much lower as, for example, in the United States or China. So this has to and this will change. A continent like ours, with limited fossil fuels resources, should lead the world on electrification. This is the reason why last December we proposed the grids package. Its goal is to make our energy and infrastructure fit for the electrification age. And I'm very glad that last week in Cyprus, the European Parliament, the Council agreed to speed up the negotiations. And as a next step, we will put forward our electrification action plan by the summer with an ambitious electrification target. And speaking of finances, in the current European budget, we have set aside almost 300 billion euros for energy, 95 billion of which are not used so far. I know I'm preaching here almost in the wrong church, but let us use this to make the switch now to electricity, not just in transport, but also in industry and in heating. This is not only a matter of affordability and competitiveness, this is also, as we learn in this crisis, a matter of economic security. Thus, speaking of European independence means it is the moment to electrify Europe. And finally, a few words on MFF. We also discussed at the informal council in Cyprus. We all know that the next budget is central to our competitiveness agenda. It can de-risk investment and crowd in private capital. It can fund strategic priorities at real European scale. It can support reforms that make Europe a better place to invest. But we must be lucid about the budgetary equation. From 2028 onwards, we will have to start to pay back Next Generation EU. We need to invest more in our new priorities, like research and development, competitiveness, defence, security, you name it. We want to sustain funding for EU's long-standing priorities, that is cohesion and the CAP. And we want to keep national contributions in check. If this is the case, all four elements, the budgetary equation is clear. New own resources are indispensable. Without them, the choice is stark: higher national contributions or lower spending, in other words, less Europe exactly when more Europe is needed. This is why the Commission has proposed a comprehensive package of new own resources, a package that is diversified, linked to our Union's policies, and capable of generating stable revenues over time. This is the only credible way to match Europe's priorities with Europe's means Thank you very much, and long live Europe.
Thank you very much, President von der Leyen. And now the first round of political group speakers, starting with the President of the EPP Group, Manfred Weber.
Madam President of the European Parliament, Commission, Council representative.